A very good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the discussion of the medicine questions which were asked in the recent FMG exam, August 2020. This is the part 2 of the video. Part 1 of the video has been already discussed. It is available in a link which is given in the description below. You can see that as well. Let's get started with the session. The first question is: an alcoholic patient developed gait abnormalities, tremors, confusion, and amnesia. This can occur due to deficiency of. This is a very classical question often asked in your exam. Many of the students got it correct also. What is this? This is nothing but a thiamine deficiency. It's a case of thiamine deficiency. Thiamine is vitamin B1 deficiency which causes all these problems. Okay, this is what we call it as a Wernicke-Korsakoff encephalopathy, where the characteristic findings are already given in the question. Now the point I would want to emphasize is that the characteristic triad of this Wernicke-Korsakoff encephalopathy is confusion, number one. Number two is ataxia. That's why the patient might have developed the gait abnormalities, okay, ataxic gait. Number three is ophthalmoplegia, okay, ophthalmoplegia. So the patient will have impaired eye movements. Very commonly, the lateral rectus of the is the most commonly affected extraocular muscle. In addition to ophthalmoplegia, even though it's not included in the triad, the patient can also have nystagmus also. These are the characteristic findings you need to know regarding Wernicke-Korsakoff encephalopathy, which occurs due to thiamine deficiency, B1 deficiency. Let's move on to the next question. In a HIV positive patient presenting with 2 weeks cough and fever, presumptive TB is being considered. What should be the next investigation? There are 4 options: CB-NAT, sputum smear for smear culture, X-ray of the chest, and CT of the chest. Okay, whenever we are suspecting tuberculosis, okay, we are going to do these tests. Okay, but the question, which should be the next investigation? There is some confusion. I'll just try to clear it up. First of all, let me tell you the answer. The answer for this question is clearly CB-NAT. Okay, what is the CB-NAT? You all must be knowing that it is a cartridge based nucleic acid amplification test. Okay, it's a cartridge based nucleic acid amplification test, and that is the investigation to be considered in this particular patient. Now when we talk about the flow chart for the diagnosis of tuberculosis, presumed tuberculosis, it is something like this. Any patient with a suspected TB, okay, the investigation could be 3 things. Okay, one is that sputum for culture as well as for microscopic examination. Second is chest X-ray. Third is CB-NAT. Okay, right. Generally, in most of the patients, okay, we are going to go for either a sputum or chest X-ray. Nowadays, chest X-ray being preferred. Okay, then the sputum. Anyway, you can do the sputum or the chest X-ray examination patient with suspected tuberculosis. But here is one thing which is very important for you to know. In a patient who is HIV positive, it is said that you start with CB-NAT. Are you able to follow? This should be very, very clear. The first test itself should be CB-NAT. Okay, but in other patients, normal patients, okay, sputum or the chest X-ray. Suppose sputum and the chest X-ray are abnormal, then you can go for CB-NAT. But in a patient with HIV positive, you start your investigation initially with CB-NAT itself. That is what is the algorithm, and you need to remember this. Let's move on to the next question. It's a new question for many of you, but still important for your exams. A child urine output is less than 0.4 ml per kg per hour for the past 14 hours. What is the KDIGO staging for this particular patient? Okay. Now, what I would want you to remember is that in a patient having an acute kidney injury or AKI, there are 2 staging systems. One is called as a rifle staging system, which is risk, injury, failure, loss, and end stage renal disease. The second thing is this KDIGO. What is this KDIGO? It is kidney disease. IGO means improving the global outcomes. Now there are 3 stagings in this particular KDIGO staging. I'll just put up this picture, okay, which tells you about the definition of acute kidney injury into 3 stages. One is based on the creatinine clearance, second is based on the urine output. Okay. In this particular question, they have asked about the urine output criteria, where you can see that here the patient is in stage 2. Why I am saying this? Because it is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for more than 12 hours. When I go back to the question, it is very clearly mentioned less than 0.5, which less than 0.4, which is less than 0.5 obviously. for past 14 hours. That means what? It is more than 12 hours. So when we look at this picture, we can be very clear that the patient is in stage 2 and the answer is option B. Okay, it is a stage 2 KDI-GO staging. Remember, KDI-GO stands for kidney disease improving global outcomes. Okay, right. Let's move on to the next question. Following laparoscopic fundoplication, a patient develops a mild pneumothorax and stable vitals. The vitals are stable. That means heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, everything is stable. What is the next step in the management? Remember, the question is asking mild pneumothorax, patient vital is stable. Answer obviously should be wait and watch. Okay, generally we wait, we see whether the person is worsening. We take a repeat X-ray and do only if there is any form of worsening. Otherwise, mild pneumothorax with stable heart rate, blood pressure and all, we'll just wait only. Okay, right. Now, laparoscopic fundoplication is something which is done for hiatal hernias. You all must be knowing that. And in cases of severe gastroesophageal reflux disease. Now, especially when it is done for cases of this hiatal hernia, what happens is that the left parietal pleura is getting exposed. Okay, so what happens? The air can leak through that communication and can result in a pneumothorax. But fortunately, most of the time it's only a mild variety, doesn't cause any problem to the patient. So that is why the answer for this particular question is wait and watch. Always remember, in other cases when you have a significant pneumothorax, always you have to go for a needle decompression. But this is mild pneumothorax in the question, so the answer is wait and watch. Let's move to the next question. Which among the following is an indication for artificial pacemaker? Okay, obviously you have to do a pacemaker when the conducting system of the heart is affected and the SA node is getting affected. You have to do this artificial pacemaker insertion. Now, among the option, which will be the best answer to choose? The answer is option D, which is marked AV nodal delay. First, let me tell you the indications for artificial pacemaker insertion. Okay, any patient who is having symptomatic bradycardia, very important word is symptomatic bradycardia. Okay, right. Like for example, syncope, something like that, symptoms are present. Bradyarrhythmia, okay, like the heart blocks, okay, and especially the AV nodal block, very important indication for pacemaker. Now, recent indications are these two: pacing after cardiac transplantation. Next is refractory heart failure, okay, refractory heart failure, or a patient having hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, okay, then you can go for pacemaker indication. These are recent indications updated. And the last one is long QT syndrome, which are usually inherited congenital syndromes. There also you need to go for a pacemaker insertion, right? So you can very clearly see that artificial fibrillation is not mentioned, supraventricular tachycardia is not mentioned, post-MI is also not mentioned. Okay, not for all cases, only some cases, but marked AV nodal delay is a clear-cut answer for this particular question. Okay, delay and block, everything, if it is marked, it is going to be needing artificial pacemaker. Right. Let's move to the next question. Identify the marked structure. What you can see in this is that there is a structure like this, a ring shaped, which is marked, and they have asked you to identify whether it's a native aortic valve, pericardial calcification, prosthetic aortic valve, prosthetic mitral valve. Remember, native aortic valve, you cannot see it on an X-ray. Remember, they cannot be seen. Only the prosthetic or the artificial valves you can see on the X-ray. Right. Okay. Now, pericardial calcification can also be seen in the X-ray, but pericardial calcification would be, pericardium is here, right? So the calcification should not be involving that area, okay? Right. So you cannot see that like this, okay? So pericardial calcification will also not be the answer. So it has to be either prosthetic aortic valve or the prosthetic mitral valve. Let me show this picture, then I will come back to the answer. Okay, you can see here this picture tells you about the, you can see this picture, okay, tells you about the approximate location of the different valves. Okay, you can see that aortic and the pulmonary or in the upper aspect. Okay, tricuspid is on the right side, mitral is on the slightly left side. Okay, it's on the left side. Right. Now put this in the picture which is given. What could be this? Yes, I think you all must be able to tell me what could be this. Yes, it is nothing but the mitral valve. That's all. Okay, answer for this question is prosthetic mitral valve. Okay, right. Let's move on to the next question. A patient had multiple episodes of diarrhea with vomiting for the past 2 days. He now presents with decreased urine output. Which of the following is likely to be present on investigation? Remember, when a patient is having diarrhea and vomiting, what type of renal failure he is going to develop? He is going to develop pre-renal failure. Okay, renal failure, because what happened, there will be decrease in the blood volume, which is going to cause decreased perfusion to the kidney. So that's a renal failure. That's what is causing decreased urine output in this particular patient. Okay, right. Now the question is, which is likely to be present on investigation? Urine sodium more than 40, it means something like a salt wasting. It is seen in case of the renal causes of renal failure. That means intrinsic renal failure. Some problem inside the kidney itself, not pre-renal. Okay, so that is not the answer. Acute glomerulonephritis, that's altogether a different thing. Okay, we'll have hematuria, hypertension, all those sorts of manifestation, and not like this renal failure as such. Okay, and acute glomerulonephritis also is going to be presenting just like intrinsic renal failure only. Okay, if at all it's present, it will be intrinsic problem inside the kidney. Okay, right. Now look at the third option, hyperosmolar urine. That is the answer for this question. Why? Because whenever there is a decreased blood supply to the kidney, and whenever there is a decrease in the blood volume, what does the kidney do? The kidney tries to conserve the water. Okay, kidney tries to concentrate the urine. Okay, conserving the water means what? The water is conserved for the purpose of circulating blood volume. So what happened? The kidney will conserve the water. Okay, so there would be decreased urine output, and not only that, the kidney, because it is conserving the water, the urine will appear to be thicker or concentrated. Okay, concentrated urine is a characteristic feature of pre-renal failure, and hence the answer for this particular question is hyperosmolar urine. Right? Okay. The differences between this pre-renal and renal, intrinsic renal. I am taking up the example of acute tubular necrosis. Anyway, it is intrinsic renal. The differences between pre-renal and intrinsic renal is always a very, very important question for the exam. So every medical student should be knowing this by heart to differentiate based on the biochemical characteristic. Okay, I was just telling you that urine sodium excretion will be more in case of renal failure, right? Renal cause of renal failure. So it will be more than 2%. It will be less than 1% in case of pre-renal. Okay. Okay, even you can see the urine sodium is more than 40 in case of acute tubular necrosis intrinsic renal, and less than 20 in case of pre-renal failure. I was telling you this, the urine will be concentrated, right? When the urine is concentrated, you can see the osmolarity will increase in case of this pre-renal failure, whereas it will not happen in case of renal failure. Okay, very simple. Okay, next one is very important. They can ask you this ratio, blood urea creatinine ratio. Okay, it will be more than 20 in case of pre-renal failure, or increase in case of pre-renal failure, usually in the normal range of 10 to 15 in case of intrinsic renal failure. Okay, right. Last option is, last point is regarding urine serum creatinine. It's not commonly asked in your exam, so you need not know it, but these four things are very, very important. Fractional sodium excretion, urinary sodium excretion, blood urea nitrogen creatinine ratio, and urine osmolarity is very, very important for your question. And in our particular question, the answer is hyperosmolar urine. It just tells you that the urine osmolarity is increased, or it's a concentrated urine. Let's move on to the next question. The next question is regarding a patient presented to the emergency department with acute migraine attack. He was given a medication following which he developed the following changes in the extremities. What is the drug responsible for symptoms, and what is the drug treatment for this particular condition? What you can see is that there is a discoloration. Very obviously there is a discoloration of the fingers. This is because of ischemia of the fingers. Okay, decreased blood supply or ischemia of the fingers is the reason. Now this question is, which drug which would have given during the termination of this migraine attack? You would have given some drug to abort that migraine attack, no? Which drug which was used could have caused ischemia and discoloration of the fingers is the question. Answer, it is dihydroergotamine. Okay, remember during acute migraine attack we give triptans like sumatriptans. Second choice or second thing we give is ergotamine. Okay, right. Usually triptans are the preferred ones. Okay, ergotamine is not nowadays commonly preferred. Still, if you use ergotamine, one of the dangerous thing is it causes intense vasoconstriction. Remember, vasoconstriction. Ergotamine causes intense vasoconstriction, and this is what is going to be responsible for ischemia and discoloration of the limbs. Very dangerous complication. If you are not going to treat it, what will happen? It can even lead on to gangrene of the limbs also, gangrene of the fingers also. Okay, that's what you need to remember. The second part of this question is, what is a drug for treatment of this condition? Okay, you have got only one option there with the ergotamine. Now it becomes easy, is it not? Right? What is it? It is sodium nitroprusside, because it will relieve that vasospasm and it will restore the blood supply. Okay, so remember, the drug which had caused this condition was dihydroergotamine, and what would relieve this particular condition would be administration of sodium nitroprusside. So the answer is option C. Drug least effective in UTI. Okay, you've got a lot of options: levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, ofloxacin, and ceftriaxone. First of all, let me tell you this, that nowadays what we are commonly using in this UTI is something like aminoglycosides or ceftriaxone, which is a third generation cephalosporin. These are commonly used drugs. Okay, right? Some cases you can use levofloxacin and ofloxacin also, but never moxifloxacin is going to be used. You can remember like this: moxifloxacin is more useful in respiratory disorders, okay, respiratory pathology like pneumonia, okay, right? That is where it is going to be used. It is not at all going to be useful in urinary infections. Okay, answer is option B. Straightforward question. What is a drug used for treatment of cystitis in pregnancy? Okay, it is again one more straightforward question. Please remember, in pregnancy the commonly used drug is a ampicillin or the amoxicillin for UTI. It's a type of UTI, right? Cystitis means infection of the bladder. Okay, so we are going to give amoxicillin or ampicillin. What are the commonly used medication in case of this treatment of UTI in pregnancy? One is amoxicillin, ampicillin. Next is we give nitrofurantoin, because it has got a very high concentration in the urinary tract. Okay, nitrofurantoin. And you can also use this cephalosporin, which is a third generation cephalosporins like ceftriaxone. Okay, these are the commonly used medications for treatment of UTI in pregnancy. Remember, ciprofloxacin, azithromycin and all are not commonly used. Especially sulfonamides is very dangerous. Okay, because what happens is that, especially in the last trimester, if you give sulfonamides, okay, they can pass through the placenta, enter into the baby, and what do? In the baby, the sulfonamides will displace the bilirubin from its binding site of albumin. So what happens, in other words, it will dangerously increase the levels of bilirubin in the baby, and it can predispose the baby to develop a dangerous complication. What is that? Kernicterus. Very important point. So that is why sulfonamides are never recommended, especially in the third trimester of pregnancy. And this is one of the questions asked in your exams also. Please make a note of it. For this particular question, the answer is only option A, which is amoxicillin or ampicillin. Let's move on to the next question. A 70-year-old patient presented with rigidity, resting tremors, and bradykinesia. Which of the following is not useful in the management of this patient? Whenever the patient is having all these features, rigidity, tremor, and bradykinesia, it is very suggestive of what? Yes, it is suggestive of Parkinsonism. Okay, Parkinson's disease. Okay, right? This is a case of Parkinson's disease. It's a neurodegenerative disorder. You can infer from the age also. It's a 70-year-old patient, means elderly patient, neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's disease. Question is, which is not useful in the management of this patient? Okay, I'm sure that you will be able to tell the answer. Okay, right? Yes, the answer for this particular question is, yes, what is that? Yes, it is rivastigmine. Okay, rivastigmine is more useful in case of this Alzheimer's disease, not in case of this Parkinson's disease. Okay, in Parkinson's disease, what is actually happening is that there is a deficiency of dopamine, right? There is a deficiency of dopamine. That is why you can give levodopa, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and can get converted to dopamine in the brain and can be useful. You can also use this pramipexole, which is a dopamine agonist agent, which can be helpful in case of this Parkinson's disease. What are the other drugs which can be helpful in the treatment? Other drugs are the COMT inhibitors. For example, the tolcapone can be helpful. What else? You all must be knowing MOA inhibitors. What is the example? You know that salicylic. These are the useful group of drugs in case of the Parkinson's disease. Okay. The next one is not a drug, but deep brain stimulation is also useful in cases of Parkinson's disease, and that is one of the recent therapeutic advances in case of Parkinson's disease. Anyway, clearly the answer for this question is rivastigmine, because it is more useful in case of Alzheimer's rather than Parkinson's disease. Let's move on to the next question. A patient complains of shooting pain on the right side of the face while smiling and on touching the face. Which of the following medication helps in symptomatic relief? Okay. Now, there are some certain points in the face, especially around the eyes and cheeks and all, okay, which are actually the areas of innervation of trigeminal nerve. And then whenever the patient complains of the shooting pain, okay, on these areas, it is very suggestive of something called as trigeminal neuralgia. So most probably the question was asking about treatment of trigeminal neuralgia. Okay, abnormal sensitivity of the nerve endings causing the shooting pain or something like a electrical shock like pain. It's also called as the electrical shock like pain in the face. Okay, right. So it's a pharmacology question basically. What is the medication which gives relief? Okay, among the options given, you have to choose the first choice medication is going to be carbamazepine. You can also use carbamazepine, and the other medication, which are the second line medications, would be another anti-epileptic. What is that? Yes, phenytoin. Next, lamotrigine can be helpful. And if these are not going to work, then you can give this baclofen also, which is also helpful in these cases. These are the other medications which can be helpful in trigeminal neuralgia. Answer is option D for this particular question. Let's move to the next question. Which of the following is the preferred antihypertensive in a patient with a chronic stable angina and recurrent anxiety attacks? Okay, this is again one more straightforward question, but very important question which you need to know about. Remember, in case of chronic stable angina, what happens is that there is a decreased supply of there is a decreased blood supply to the heart, especially during exertions, right? Now what happens is that whenever there is a increased exertion, okay, and there is a decreased blood supply, what does the heart try to do? Okay, in order to maintain the cardiac output, there will be increase in the contractility of the heart, or basically what I am trying to tell you is that there is an increase in the heart rate, okay, in order to do that activity. Okay, right. So basically when you are going to treat these patients, okay, you have to give some drug which will decrease the contractility of the heart, right? Okay, and that should also be an antihypertensive. Now choose from the options: amlodipine, thiazides, atenolol, and nifedipine. Yes, it's going to be atenolol. Okay, right? And I'm sure that all of you must be knowing atenolol is one of the important cardio selective beta blockers, in that it is more potent in blocking the beta 1 receptors compared to the beta 2 receptors. Okay, so atenolol is the answer for this particular question. Let's move on to the next question. This is always one of the expected questions in your exam, is it not? Interpretation of flow volume curves or flow volume loops, okay, where they give some different shapes and ask you what is the pattern, okay, right? Is it a normal pattern? Definitely wrong. Then whether it's an obstructive or a restrictive pattern. The answer for this particular question, I think most of you must have got it correct. It's a case of obstructive lung disease. Why do I tell it as obstructive lung disease? You can see this characteristic concavity pattern, okay, which is coving pattern. Second is that there is a slight shift to the left, okay, there is a slight shift to the left of the curve, okay, right. Now let me draw the normal flow volume pattern. Now what I have marked in the, what I have drawn in this purple color is a normal flow volume pattern. So you can see that the volume is decreased. Number two is that you can see that it is slightly shifted to the left, okay, and normal you don't see any concavity like that, is it not? So that's how you differentiate the obstructive lung disease from the normal pattern. Now for comparison, I am going to draw the restrictive lung pattern also. What I have drawn now, this one is a restrictive lung pattern. What you can see, there is no concavity and all here, but then what you can see is that it is shifted to the right side, right? It is shifted to the right side, okay? You can just remember, the restrictive means the curve is shifted to the right. R for restrictive and R for right, like that you can remember. So obviously you will remember, in obstructive lung disease, the curve is shifted to the left. That's how you can remember. It's a very important and a potential question for the coming exams also. We'll now continue our discussion to the next question. A patient with recurrent syncopal attacks and angina, he is diagnosed to have aortic stenosis. Which of the following finding is likely to be present in the X-ray? Okay, right. Now this question answer, the diagnosis they are given, it is aortic stenosis. They are just asking you which is the likely X-ray finding. Okay, first let me explain and come back to the answer. Now you see the picture, you concentrate on the X-ray. That X-ray is the X-ray of a patient having aortic stenosis. This is a patient who is having aortic stenosis. Now on side you can see the diagrammatic representation of what happens in aortic stenosis. Remember, this is the left ventricular muscle, okay. Now this is the area of stenosis, because this is the valve, right? This is the area of stenosis. The valve is becoming smaller or constricted. That's called as stenosis. Okay, right. Now, because the valve is stenosed, okay, the blood is not able to flow through the stenosed valve in a usual flow. The left ventricle has to generate excess pressure, right, in order to push the blood outside. So what happens in that process? It undergoes hypertrophy. So that is why there is left ventricular hypertrophy. Okay, right. Now what happens is that after this is left ventricle, this is the valve area, and this is the aorta, right? This is the aorta. Now what happens is that following a constriction, after the constriction, the aorta will dilate in this area. This is what we refer to as the post-stenotic dilatation. Can you see that? Okay, once there is a constriction in the valve, the immediate adjacent portion of the aorta, which is nothing but the ascending aorta, which is going up, okay, that will undergo dilatation. This is called as post-stenotic dilatation. And that is what you exactly see in this X-ray. Can you see that? This X-ray, what I have marked is the post-stenotic dilated area of the aorta. Okay, normally it should be only like this. Normally it should be like this dotted lines. But then here it is widened, which is what is representing post-stenotic dilatation. Usually post-stenotic dilatation is in the ascending aorta. Some part of the arch of aorta may get dilated. But what is definitely present, it is a ascending aorta which is dilated. And in long-standing cases, you can get calcifications of the aortic valve also. Okay, right. Now come back to the question. What is the answer? The answer is what? Answer is post-stenotic dilatation. Okay, it is not dilated descending aorta but dilated ascending aorta. There is no option for widening of the aortic knob because it's aortic stenosis, and there is no dilated aortic valve also. Okay, right. So the answer for this is post-stenotic dilatation, which is option A. Let's come back to the next question. Identify from the X-ray. Okay, what you can see, obviously the pathology is on this side. Okay, you all must be knowing that. Okay, you can see that there is too much dark shadows on the right side. This is the right side, too much of dark shadow, which is suggestive of pneumothorax. Okay, whenever there is hyper expansion, too much darkness or air in collecting in one of the lung fields, then it is suggestive of pneumothorax. Here you have two options, pneumothorax and hydropneumothorax. Hydropneumothorax means addition of water or fluid inside the lungs. Okay, now tell me what could be the answer, whether it's a pneumothorax or hydropneumothorax. Answer is hydropneumothorax. Why I am saying this? Because you can see this flat line, right? You can see this flat line like this, straight line like this. That is actually the air fluid interface, or what we call it as a air water interface. That is called as air water interface. Okay, that will be always be shown as a straight line. So here there is both air as well as there is a fluid. So this is very, very suggestive of hydropneumothorax, not just pneumothorax, right? Let's move to the next question. A patient on long-term steroid now presents with decreasing vision. What is the likely cause? Remember all the conditions given in the option like central retinal artery occlusion, CRAO, cataract, detachment, macular edema can cause decreasing vision. Definitely yes. But this patient, the question is about long-term steroids. What is the answer for this question? It is a straightforward answer, which is cataract. Usually they develop posterior subcapsular cataracts commonly. Okay, subcapsular cataract. So the answer for this particular question is cataract. Okay, option B. Let's move on to the next question. In a patient presenting with acute onset chest pain, following findings were noted on examination: low blood pressure, engorged veins, and poorly audible heart sounds. X-ray chest is given. What do you think is a diagnosis? Okay, what does the X-ray chest reveal? The X-ray chest reveals a widely expanded cardiac shadow. Is it not? Okay, this is what we call it as a water bottle configuration of the heart. Okay, water bottle configuration of the heart. Now, one more important clue: the diagnosis not made on chest X-ray. Remember, it is made based on the findings which you get. What are they? You can get low blood pressure. You are getting engorged neck veins or elevated jugular veins. Okay, poorly audible heart sound. They can also give you as muffled heart sounds. These are three findings which are actually a part of the triad: low blood pressure, distended neck veins, and decreased intensity or muffled heart sounds. This is what we call it as a Beck's triad, right? This is called as a Beck's triad. And what is the diagnosis? The diagnosis is, yes, what is the diagnosis? It is cardiac tamponade. What is cardiac tamponade? Cardiac tamponade means rapid development of pericardial effusion. It's very fast collection of fluid around the heart, which cause compression of all the chambers of the heart. This is called as cardiac tamponade, characterized by Beck's trial. Another finding, characteristic finding of cardiac tamponade, which is not given in this question but can very well be asked in your exams, is something called as a pulsus paradoxus. What is this pulsus paradoxus? It is decrease in the systolic blood pressure to more than 10 millimeters of mercury during inspiration. That is called as pulsus paradoxus, a very characteristic association with cardiac tamponade. Not given in the question, but you should know for the upcoming exams. Okay, right. The answer for this question is cardiac tamponade. Let's move to the next question. An elderly patient who is a known case of irregularly controlled hypertension had a fall. CT head is shown below, which is a true statement. Okay. What you are seeing in this picture is that you are seeing something which is white here, which is actually the bleed into the brain parenchyma. Okay, brain parenchyma, right? Okay, now the question is, the question is incomplete. It was a known case of hypertension. Remember, it is HT, hypertension. Okay, yes, it's given. Irregularly controlled hypertension had a fall. Okay, remember, what could be the reason the person could have fallen? Okay, following a hypertension. The reason is given in the CT. What is that? It is a bleeding, okay, which is causing stroke, cerebrovascular accident. Okay, because of the stroke, the patient would have fallen. That's all. Okay, the CT head is shown below. Now you have to connect this hypertension with stroke. Hypertension with bleeding causing stroke is usually related to bleeding from the putamen. Putamen is the most common site of bleed in case of hypertension causing stroke. Very, very important and often asked exam question you should be knowing about. Okay, right. The next one I would want you to remember is regarding the other options. Okay, start antiplatelet medication. There is no need for that. It is not due to this thrombosis and all. Only in case of thrombosis, okay, you are going to start this antiplatelet medication, but this is not thrombosis, but this is bleeding, right? Start platelet transfusion, again not indicated, it not due to thrombocytopenia. Immediate stabilization of blood pressure to normal range. Remember, in hypertension you have to stabilize the blood pressure, but to normal range is not at all required. Very important, very important. The goal of stabilization of blood pressure in case of this hypertensive emergencies is that it should be, goal should be 120 to 130 millimeters of mercury for systolic and 70 to 79 millimeters mercury for diastolic. Right? It is not normal. Normal means what? Less than 120. No, it should not be to less than 120. It should be 120 to 130 millimeters of mercury. Okay? Right. Because if you cause too much of reduction in the blood pressure, what can happen? It can decrease the perfusion to the brain also. That's why. Okay? So the range is only 120 to 130 millimeters of mercury systolic. It is not normalization. It's not completely normalization. Right? Anyway, the answer for this question is hypertension, because remember, in hypertension, putamen is one of the most common sites of bleeding, and that's an MCQ by itself. Let's move to the next question. In a patient with a chronic vomiting, which of the following abnormalities is noted? Right, whenever there is lot of vomiting, okay, whenever the patient is vomiting from the gastrointestinal tract, okay, what is happening? The stomach contents are also getting vomited out. Okay, what is the stomach content? It is hydrochloric acid. So what happened? H plus will be lost, Cl minus will be lost in the vomit. Okay, right? So what happened? There will be hypochloremia, correct? Number two, because of H plus loss, there will be alkalosis. Okay, so you can choose between the options A and B, because both of them have hypochloremia with alkalosis, right? Other things will not be the answer because they are having acidosis. That is wrong. Okay, so you have to choose only hypochloremia with alkalosis. Now the question is whether it is hyponatremia or hypernatremia. Remember this, chronic vomiting means too much of vomiting. Okay, too much of vomiting will lead on to dehydration. And this will make the patient to be prone for hyponatremia. The answer for this question is hypochloremic, hyponatremic metabolic alkalosis. These patients can also have additionally hypokalemia as well. So the complete metabolic abnormality which you need to know about is hypochloremic, hyponatremic, hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis. That is encountered in case of chronic vomiting. This same abnormality is usually encountered in case of this small kids who are having the abnormality. What is that abnormality I'm going to talk about? Yes, pyloric stenosis. Whenever they are having this pyloric stenosis, hypertrophic pyloric stenosis also, a similar type of presentation can occur. And that's also an important MCQ question which you need to know about. Let's move to the next question. A young male presents with intermittent headache, sweating, palpitation and hypertension. What is the diagnosis? Remember, for this particular question, okay, there are two immediate diagnoses which are possible. One is hyperthyroidism, other is pheochromocytoma, because both of them can have the sweating, palpitations as well as some hypertension. But you don't get headache intermittent headache in case of hyperthyroidism, right? It is not at all present. Okay, it is present only in case of pheochromocytoma, and the answer for this question. Okay, in fact, the presence of this headache, sweating and palpitation is considered as a triad in case of this pheochromocytoma. And you all must be knowing pheochromocytoma is something which is a tumor arising from the adrenal medulla. Okay, a very important question. In this particular question, hypothyroidism and Cushing syndrome is not at all going to be the answer. Only it is the differences between hyperthyroidism and pheochromocytoma. Headache rules out presence of headache will say that this is most probably a case of pheochromocytoma, especially because the triad is present. Okay, right. Now let's move on to the last question. A patient with thyroid mass is being planned for surgery. She also has episodic hypertension, headache and palpitation. Her mother had renal calculi. Prior to thyroid surgery, what should be the investigation to be done? Okay, now this is a question linking so many disorders. One is thyroid, obviously. Second is the patient is having palpitation, hypertension and headache. So what is this? This is probably what? That's what we discussed in the previous question. What is this? Is the pheochromocytoma. This is probably a case of pheochromocytoma. So patient having some thyroid problem as well as pheochromocytoma. And remember, one more clue. What is that? Mother had renal calculi. Okay. Now I just want you to think one step further. Think of this renal calculi as a manifestation of one endocrine disorder. What will be the answer? Yes, it's a manifestation of what? Hypercalcemia. Correct. It's a manifestation of hypercalcemia, and the probable underlying condition would be hyper PTH. PTH means parathyroid. Hyperparathyroidism. Probably it could be hyperparathyroidism. So you got three endocrine disorders. What are they? One is parathyroid, second is thyroid, third is the adrenal medulla, okay, causing pheochromocytoma. So this is what we call it as MEN syndromes, or what we call it as a multiple endocrine neoplasias. An association of this thyroid problem, hyperparathyroidism along with pheochromocytoma is called as MEN2 syndrome, and specifically it is MEN2A syndrome or Sipples syndrome. Okay, right. Now, tell me the answer. Serum calcium and phosphorus, just like that, will not give you any clue. Okay, right? It can tell you that is hypercalcemia, but that will not be the answer to the question. Okay, that will not answer the MEN syndrome itself. Okay, right? No. Urine VMA, yes, that is the answer. Urine VMA is what? Vanillyl mandelic acid, which is one of the metanephrines, which is very helpful in the management of pheochromocytoma. Okay, right? Then urine 5-HIA, what is that? Hydroxyindoletic acid. This is useful in the evaluation of carcinoid syndrome. All of you must have learned. Okay, right. So anyway, for this particular question, the answer is urine vanillyl mandelic acid, because it will help you in the diagnosis of pheochromocytoma. Some of the students may have marked calcium and phosphorus thinking that it can help in the diagnosis of hyperparathyroidism. No, hyperparathyroidism, you have to do the assay of parathyroid hormone to tell the diagnosis. So that is why the option A is not the answer for this question. It is VMA to help in the diagnosis of pheochromocytoma. Anyway, it's a slightly important question which integrates with so many endocrine disorders. Now, just to wind up the session, I am going to tell you about the MEN syndrome, which is MEN1 and MEN2. MEN1 is called as the Wermer syndrome, where we characteristically remember as 3 P's. One is the parathyroid, next is the pituitary, third is the pancreatic tumors. MEN2 is again divided into 2A and 2B. The common features of 2 are pheochromocytoma, second is medullary carcinoma of thyroid, which is the thyroid problem. Now, talking about MEN2A, what are the features you have? You have additionally the parathyroid hyperplasia, which is causing hyperparathyroidism. Second is that the patient can have Hirschsprung disease. Okay, Hirschsprung disease. Right? This is about MEN2A. And MEN2B, you can have additionally mucosal neuromas. Okay, they are called as mucosal neuromas, and they can have this tall stature, what we call it as a Marfanoid habitus. Okay, please remember this Menn syndrome manifestation by heart, because every competitive exam you will get one question based on this. So that completes our discussion of the medicine question asked in FMG August 2020 sessions. Thanks for watching, and please share with your friends. If you have any doubts, please do it in the comment section below. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and please press on the bell icon so that you get notified of videos as and when they are posted. Please do have a look at the other related videos for the FMG and the other exams also, which is available under the channel description. Thanks a lot, and I will see you very soon in another video. Have a good day.